All right, it's 6:30. It's Thursday night, April 30th, 2020, and we're live streaming on Facebook. Good evening. This is OS Virtual Check-in for Thursday night, April 30th, and my co-hosts, as always, are Michelle Kempema of the Colorado Model Railroad Museum and our buddy WR54 Roseville, well, Chris Palomarez. How's it going? I'm glad to have you on here. Thanks for being with us, co-host, and thank you for being with us as our participants tonight, our live studio audience. I like to start out by talking about what OS Virtual Check-in is. If you want to know what OS stands for, you're going to probably have to go back to the original video that I posted where I talked about where the term OS came from, but it doesn't mean operating system. It's a railroad term. Most of you probably know what it means. Anyway, OS Virtual Check-in, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 6:30 Mountain Time to 7:30 Mountain Time, is a way for us as co-sponsors, Caboose and Colorado Model Railroad Museum, to support the train enthusiast community. And it's on the same Zoom calling platform every Tuesday and Thursday night, 6:30 to 7:30 Mountain Time. And the format, it's also Facebook Live now. And the format is interview for probably the first 45 to 55 minutes and then Q&A. You can type your question in at any point during this cast by just moving your cursor to the bottom of the screen, and you'll see a little nav bar pop up. Right in the middle of that, next to a green bubble, is a white bubble that says chat. You click that chat button, you type in your question at any point, and then when we get toward the end, when we take Q&A, Michelle will go through your questions in turn. Works pretty much the same way on Facebook as it does with a regular post. Ground rules. We're here to connect with fellow train enthusiasts, have fun, so be respectful, no trolling, no grandstanding, no inappropriate comments, and we're here to have fun, so let's not talk about politics. We're here, we're recording all these shows and we're posting them to YouTube as soon as we get them edited and processed. We have, I don't know if Gerald's on the show tonight, but we have, as last I looked, we have 3 or 4 up there of the first 3 or 4 shows. So we're getting them up there a little bit at a time. And we're open to suggestions always. So if you see something you think needs improvement, or you have a suggestion for a guest, whatever it might be, we're open to suggestions. You can reach out to any one of us as co-hosts, and we'll take it under advisement. So tonight, our guest is John Parker, creator of the BNSF Fall River Division, an amazing model railroad. And John has an interesting story for us as well, as far as how he got to this point. And so, and that's what we're going to start with. John, thank you for being on OS Virtual Check-in tonight. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here.
As we always do, let's start with tell our callers and our participants a little bit about yourself, about your background, where you grew up, and particularly about how you got to a 3,000 square foot basement full of trains. Tell us about your passion for trains.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Again, it's great to be here, and I appreciate your putting these calls on. I think during this time, it's a great way to stay connected and to keep in touch and learn a little bit. So hats off to you and the team here for putting the call together.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I grew up in North Minneapolis, and I got into trains when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. My uncle had gone off to college, or was going off to college. So my mom and dad packed everybody in the car. We drove to Michigan and to see him off. And he gave me this big box, just a huge box. And I really wasn't sure what was in it until we came home, and I got it down to the basement with my dad and opened it up. And sure enough, it was an HO scale train set. So I'm going through the box, pulling out the power pack, the locomotive and the cars, the sectional track, and surprised that also in that box was a Colt 45 pistol. And I'm sure at the time I thought, wow, what a great uncle, trains and a pistol. Wow.
How old did you say you were? at the time?
I was not eight or nine, probably
8 or
just
9?
turning
Yeah.
nine.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And it turns out that pistol was only a BB gun. And I'm sure to this day, my parents don't know that I ever had it at 9 years old, but it was fantastic. And that spawned a whole nother hobby, right? So that's why I started.
This part of the story reminds me of two quotes from A Christmas Story. One is, you get down to the basement with a big box. Well, there could be anything in there, right?
That's right, yeah.
And the second one is, you'll shoot your eye out.
A BB gun, that's right, yeah. Not a lot of fun with that, believe me. So, but anyway, so I vividly remember, in the basement, setting up, the oval track with the sectional track and the plastic-filled buildings, and it was a Rio Grande F7 and a bunch of freight cars, and that's really what sparked my interest in model railroading. So I also grew up along the Sioux line in North Minneapolis near what's called the Humboldt Yard. Mm-hmm. And had a couple of friends that lived, their backyards backed right up to the main line and the drill track to the yard. And so we spent just hours and hours out there watching trains coming and going, and that would have been in the 70s. So I spent a lot of time rail fanning the Sioux line. And of course, as I got older and I ventured out into the city and so forth, I became enamored with the BN that also ran through, at that time, through Minneapolis. So, Minneapolis was a great place to rail fan. And it just kind of all came together with the model railroading and the rail fanning. So.
Well, there are a lot of rail fans in the Twin Cities area. Right.
Yeah, and a lot of great layouts. I've been up there and operated a few times, and I still have some family in Minneapolis, so I get up there and once every few years anyway, and operate and visit the old neighborhood and rail fans. So it's a great place.
Nice.
So I was a model railroader throughout high school, and I think like most people, I followed the common path where after high school, went to school and started a family, and I took a break. And early on in my career, a colleague had brought a Walthers catalog into the office. And I'd never seen a Walthers catalog, even though, when I was in high school and, spent a lot of time in the hobby shop, I'd never experienced a Walthers catalog. So he brought this Walthers catalog into the office, and I couldn't believe it. I was just shocked. It's this huge catalog with all these products in there for HO scale. And I just couldn't tear myself away from it. And I asked him where I could get a copy. And he told me about this hobby shop in Denver called Caboose Hobbies. So, of course, I drove right down there. And, of course, again, my I was just amazed at Caboose Hobbies and picked up a catalog and a few other things. And that's really what re-sparked my interest probably in my mid-20s.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's how I got back into it and was reintroduced into the hobby.
And how dog-eared did that catalog get?
Oh yeah, it was amazing.
Right.
I could still remember it. Just like, wow. And the fact that a colleague was a model railroader and brought a Walthers catalog into the office was pretty amazing. So
yeah, that's cool. That is cool.
Who knows where I'd be if that never had happened? I don't know.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Maybe shooting your eye out.
Right. Well, there were a lot of times that we were rail fanning when I happened to have a BB gun along. So not sure why, but there were a lot of stories I shouldn't be telling that, but that did happen. So anyway, I did get back into the hobby in my 20s. I was a lone wolf for quite a while. I wasn't aware of the community that was out there, the model railroading community. And by that time I'd been in Colorado. And, just going to Caboose and learning about the NMRA. And, I started to make some contacts. I did join a local club in Boulder years after that. And I learned of an individual that had an operating layout. And I finally had the courage, and this was probably 25 years ago, I'm thinking mid-90s probably, that finally got the courage up to ask him if I could come over and observe an operating session, right? Just observe. I was already scared to death, intimidated. I didn't want to, make a big deal about it. And he said, sure, come on over. And I think he said it started at noon or something. And of course, I showed up right at noon, and everybody else was there. Of course, when you go to an operating session, you get there early to, shoot the breeze, socialize, see the layout. And I didn't know that. I showed up right on time. And sure enough, there were 14, 15 people you know, talking and friendly with each other. They all knew each other. They were all experienced, and it was just very intimidating for me. So I got through it. I was there to observe, and when we started the operating session, the owner threw a throttle in my hand and said, "Go to work." And I said, "Wow," and so that really started my passion with operating sessions and operating model railroads, and that's my real passion, is building a layout and operating. So since then, I've been operating. I travel over the country and operate conventions wherever I can. Get into an operating session. So that's my real primary passion is operations.
Part of the OPSIG group, I'm sure, right?
OPSIG, LDSIG, you name it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
observation is not an option.
That's right. Yeah. And I treat new operators I treat new operators the same way when they come over to my place first time. You're not going to, and I've had people ask me, can I come over and observe? And the answer is sure. But when they get here, they get a throttle and they'll go with somebody. So not, to help them along.
Observe your conductor's hands.
Yeah, that's right. So I learned the great way, and I appreciate all the time that individual giving me the opportunity to operate. So
nice.
I try to return the favor within the community as much as I can.
Very good. Very good.
So that's about it for my background, I think.
And this, how many layouts have you built before this one?
Oh boy, there's been a few large layouts. I started out with a loop on the basement floor when I was 9 years old, and then I've had 4x8s and anything I could get away with, right? So this is probably my third large layout.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When I was a lone wolf, I had a medium to large size layout, and especially after attending that first operating session, I came home and as I learned more about operations, I was pretty dissatisfied with the current layout that I had, and I knew I had to do something different. And I still believe that today, that if you're not satisfied, change it. Don't live with it. Don't hesitate to make a change, whether it's something very simple or the entire layout.
Mm-hmm.
So shortly after I got into operations, I knew that my layout was not an operating layout; it was a rail fanning layout, and I tore the whole thing down, took it out of the basement, and it was probably 1,300 square feet. And my wife saw that and was convinced that I was going to leave her because I was taking the railroad out. Why else would anybody take a large mile railroad out of their basement? Right? So
where's he going?
That's right. Yeah. So I convinced her, and as soon as, of course, I started buying new, lumber and stuff at the hardware store, she knew what was really going on. So
she's good.
Yeah. So, it was the right decision to make. I mean, you really cannot, if you're dissatisfied with anything, you've got to change it, even the layout, because you don't want it to become a lame duck and lose interest. And I think that's the reason some people, get into that paralysis, maybe even get out of the hobby, is because they're just not satisfied or happy. And for whatever reason, and they've got to make a change. So
well, and I presume that that informs your whole planning process, right?
Sure.
Because when you're you know what you want to avoid next time, and you know what you want to include next time.
Right.
So that has to inform your planning process for the next layout, right?
Yeah. Even if even this layout I have now, for example, there were times where, and I'll give you an example. I do have some branch lines, but I wanted to have a larger branch line. And even after the construction started and we were years into the construction, it was just gnawing at me. And using that philosophy of not being afraid to make a change, I made a change with this layout design, and we constructed a new branch line, and I was very satisfied about that, very happy about it. So it's you've got to do that. You've got to make the change,
sure.
even if after you've started the layout, if you're not happy with something. Don't stay dissatisfied and make the change, really.
Well, because that's the bottom line. It's about our
Yeah.
enjoyment of
right.
trains and our enjoyment of the hobby. And
Right.
If you're not enjoying it, make the change. Don't be afraid to make the change, right?
Yeah, and as we move along and progress through the hobby, either we learn about operations, or we learn new things, we acquire new skills. There's new technology, new something new, and we see that and we want it. I think we should do everything we can to go after it. So
I think it goes all the way down to the old adage of when we're looking for a house, that we look for the appropriate basement and then a place on top to eat and sleep and go to the bathroom and park your car, right?
Right, exactly. I've been there and done that. So
yes, right. I think we all have.
yeah. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Fall River Division.
Okay. I'm going to try to load some charts here that should help. Let's see here. Can I share the screen, Kevin?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so as a reference, I do have a web page and a Facebook page, and there's a lot of great information on my web page about the design, the construction, operations. I use it as a tool, especially for operators. A lot of good job descriptions are on there, layout diagrams, etc. Some links to some videos. So feel free to go to the web page or my Facebook page. I typically provide a lot of updates on Facebook as opposed to the web page, just because it's easier, and I think a lot of people are expecting it because they're on Facebook. So, So the BNSF Fall River Division is a modern, I call it modern, prototype freelance model railroad. The era is 2016, 2017. I've made several era changes because, again, as new equipment has come out, for example, the Tier 4 models and some freight cars, and I just had to have them on the layout. So I changed the era. I've done that several times, and it's not an easy task because I have to go back and take equipment off or renumber, reletter equipment, and so forth. So I try to keep up, but there still is some freelance aspect to it. For example, if you take this ET44C4 in the lower right-hand corner, I got to tell you a story. I was in with a friend, John Adams. We were in Lombard Hobbies a few years ago, and Scale Trains had just come out with these Tier 4 locomotives, and he's an end scaler and I'm an HO, and we're at Lombard, and Lombard's got this big end cap just full of these things, right? And for those that don't know, BNSF has what's called this Smurf scheme. They acquired a number of Jeep 38-2s that were from EMD, and they're blue, and they put a white BNSF logo on them. And so we both liked that scheme, and we challenged each other to buy one of these Tier 4s, turned into a Smurf unit, and put it on our layouts.
Nice.
And so we both did that. And so this is my version right here in the lower right-hand corner, and I have it on the layout because it's a freelance layout. I have that opportunity to do that. And that's
your layout, right?
That's right. Yeah, rule number one, right? So that's a great thing about freelancing is I could cheat a little bit if I want to, and that's what I like about it, and that's why I've chosen to be a freelancer, prototype freelancer anyway. So the layout itself isn't modeled after any geographic area because, again, I wanted that flexibility to model modern equipment, both Rocky Mountain terrain and prairies and so forth. So Wyoming, I got a lot of Wyoming terrain on the layout. So I've done that, and that's what I like about freelancing, having the ability to do that and not feeling guilty about it. So we built the house in 2005 and started in earnest on the layout in 2006. It's again a modern CTC controlled. A guy named Rod Black had written some CTC application for model railroaders. It's called CATS. It's being widely used now in the model railroad community. It monitors the I can't remember what the prototype is that the software models, but it does emulate the modern CTC, CRT, CTC system pretty accurately. So we do have branch lines, interchange with other railroads, the Iowa Interstate on the east end of the railroad, the Montana Rail Link, the UP, and the UP does have trackage rights over a big part of the railroad. So we see a lot of UP and BNSF on the layout.
Nice.
And the layout was really designed for operations. I like to use the term design for people first, which was really a Byron Henderson concept in terms of model railroad design for operations. For example, the aisles are wider than the benchwork width. There's carpet on the floor. It's a very comfortable environment. The lighting is better than adequate for the actual operators as opposed to the model railroad itself. So there's a lot of we have a crew lounge here. It's just a very comfortable area, and the primary focus was on people first, because it really is about people when we have 15, 20 operators over to the house. So. And it's a multi-level layout. It's a mushroom, and we'll talk about that. But my goals with the multi-level layout was to, of course, maximize the mainline length when we're operating. Of course, the more linear mainline, the better. Certainly want to increase the distance between locations so that you can't see a town ahead or behind you within your visual range. And in addition to the mainline, I wanted lots of switching. And we'll talk about some of that. And I really wanted to create that feeling of isolation for operators. So when you take a train out and you're going down one of the peninsulas, you don't know what's 10, 15, 20 feet around the corner from you.
Nice.
Just like if you're out on the prototype, you're kind of isolated, you're by yourself, you're relying on your wits when you're operating, radio communication signals, things like that. And that really gives you, I think, a more accurate feeling of prototype operations. So, and the railroad was designed and built with the help of a lot of great people. No question about it. It took me a year to design the layout, and a lot of that time was reviewing it with other folks, the LD SIG friends, other layout owners, getting their feedback, making changes. I wasn't afraid to, ask people for their input. And if I got 10 ideas, maybe I took one or two only, and that was fine. So I was inspired, and a lot of people reviewed it. And I also put together a great crew. Some of these pictures here are the people that are involved. Whit Carmen, I'll go to the upper right-hand corner. Whit Carmen, John Marlin, Mike Carr, and Mike Spahn, sitting on top of a helix that we were constructing.
Helix fire pit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they're doing, roasting something over that bottle of water. I can't tell. But this is also a great shot because it shows you how the helixes were constructed with trapezoid cutouts of sheet 3/4 inch. I'm sorry, I think it was, might have been 3/8 plywood, laminated, screwed, and glued together. And so that's how all the helixes were built. For just efficient use of the plywood. And on the left here, we're ballasting. So we got Mike Command, Mike Spahn, Mike Carr, Whit Carmen, and I think that's Frank Labor in the back. And we're having a ballasting party up here at the arrival and departure tracks at the coal mine. So that's what's happening there. So, I got to shout out to these guys. They spent a lot of time over here, and I really do appreciate all their efforts and contributions to the layout. We certainly wouldn't be here without the help of some great people. So,
absolutely, it's what it's all about. This looks like it might be. That looks like it might be a government ballasting job, because it looks like there was one person ballasting and the rest of them watching.
Yeah, and making weird faces. You can see some of their facial expressions. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but I can. So, but we had a good time, and that's what mattered. So. Okay, the layout at a glance. It is a 3,000 square foot footprint, and that includes the crew lounge in my shop and a small utility room.
Gentlemen, we did have a question come up already that was the overall dimensions.
Well, I'll show that because I do have a track plan.
Okay.
And I'll show that and talk about that because it's kind of weird how the house was built and the cutouts and things like that. So I'll be able to explain that better in the next. I think it's the next chart. So I've got at least 1,000 freight cars on the layout. We have occasionally counted 120 operating locomotives on the layout. 21 scale miles. There's at least 130 fluorescent, 4-foot fluorescent light fixtures, and I'm using daylight color tones, about 6,000 K. So 6,000. We also operate at night, and we have blue LEDs throughout the entire layout, and we've For some reason, we counted and we had 11,200, at least 11,000 night LEDs.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. The backdrops are made from 60,000 styrene, 11 DCC boosters, 40 circuit breaker, protected power districts. And then within each of those districts, there are just numerous blocks. So, because when we have detection because of the CTC, the layout is laid out in different blocks. So I'm sure there's hundreds of blocks. And we had at least 100 operating sessions. I think we're up to 107 or 108, 110 operating sessions. And we brought together a lot of good friends, made new friends, acquaintances, fellow model railroaders, and worldwide guests. We had people from all over the world come and operate. So it's been a real pleasure to share the layout with everybody and meet some great people and spend some good quality time with everybody. So we call it quality throttle time. So,
nice.
Yeah. Now, let me back up here. There's some other details people might be interested in. The layout height is between 48 and 60, depending on where you are, and we'll talk about that in a minute. All the main line and yards are code 83. The turnouts on the main are all number 8s, 6s in the yards and industries. The sub road bed is either masonite spline or plywood. And then the road bed itself is, for the most part, homosote and home bed, the pre-cut road bed made out of homosote, which is just fantastic. I love that. At least 36-inch minimum super elevated curves on the main. All the main lines are super elevated. The curves, 36 is the minimum, but on the main line and the helix were 40, 42, 44. The grade, the maximum grade is 1.8%, and that's, of course, visible. Helixes are less than that. We're using DCC, Digitrax radio. Signals are all Tomar, BLMAs, CATs for dispatching. The detection is Digitrax, BDL-168s, and the decoder signals are SCHCs, which are, I just love the SCHCs, real value for the money. When you talk about turnout control, signaling, and 8 additional inputs for the price. So, and for car forwarding, we're using JRMRI operations in real time, meaning that during an operating session, there's a person that actually is generating manifests and switch lists and giving them to the crew as things are happening. So
that's cool. Yeah.
Okay, a couple of FAQs real quick. The backdrop is made from 60,000 styrene. I get that question all the time. It's either hand painted. I had a friend from Denver, and she came up and painted quite a bit of the scenery, photoshopped images, and some pre-printed backdrops. There is a 12-volt bus that any finished scenery is all lit using LEDs and a few incandescent light fixtures. DCC circuit breakers are DCC specialties, not the Digitrax PM42s. And the trees are primarily super trees with knock leaf materials, and pine trees are Grand Central gems, Keebury, and homemade goodies. So a lot of this and a lot of that and that just happens over time. It's I remember when I started the layout and we started painting backdrop, there was very little discussion about using Photoshop to edit real images, and that was 14, 15 years ago. So,
yeah, that's
okay.
Common now, like you say.
It is common, yeah. And I do that all the time. I just did a couple of backdrops for an area I'm working on, and I grab some images off the internet and modify them in Photoshop, and they work out great. So, okay, so the mushroom. Let's talk about the mushroom. That the mushroom is a multi-level layout, and this image in the lower left is from Joe Fugate's Siskiyou line, and he was an original. He was one of the originals, not the first, but he was an early adopter of the mushroom. And typically, it's defined as a multi-level layout where on the sides, to the left and the right, you have a single level. But in the peninsula areas, you have a multi-level, but they face each other. And so that's where this mushroom comes from. Here's the stem. Can you guys see that? Let me see if I can annotate here. Okay, so here's the stem, and it goes out, and that's kind of where the mushroom name has come from.
Yep.
Right. It helps, it really helps if you have high ceilings in the basement. This is an early shot of the construction. And as you can imagine, this guy right here is pretty close to the ceiling, right? So I happen to have a 16-inch raised floor. This is a 15. But if you can add some headroom up here, it's fantastic to raise the ceiling, which is what I did. And I added another, I think it was 14 inches to the basement height, so that I could have the floor joists 14 inches higher. And that gave me about 9.5 feet from the concrete floor to the top of the floor joists. So that's a, if you can, you should have the highest ceilings as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get out of here.
Back to the concept of planning, it
Right.
goes back to designing the basement itself.
Exactly. And during the construction of my home, I was here every day, just to make sure. In fact, when they did a lot of this basement work, they had drains in the wrong places, and I had to go back to the plan and, correct it with the builder and so forth. And it was a real challenge, but we got it right. I think we got it right. So let's see. Okay, so this is a shot of the basement before the layout, and you can see that there's very little in the way in these floor joists with ductwork and utilities and so forth, because we tuck them up into the between the floor joists here. So I did have an electrical sub panel installed before the layout. I filled all the expansion joints with caulk. We sealed the basement floor several times, and I built the lounge, which is right here, the crew lounge. And off to the left is my shop and utilities, and framed those all in. And so I took a little bit of time to get things prepared right before we started the construction itself. And I did have a real challenge with the building inspectors. I mean, I pulled permits and did everything. And there were two building inspectors with me along with me this entire journey. And when we finished everything, you could see that the walls in the basement are still framed. The whole basement was framed out. And because that's how the layout is supported, is by the framing on the walls and all the framing. So anyway, when I finished the crew lounge and we finalized the permit, the building inspector came to me and said, and I explained to him, I was very honest with him exactly what I was doing. And he came to me and said, I am not convinced that you're telling me the truth, and you're going to finish this basement. And that's why that you're leaving these walls framed and nothing else here. So I said, well, that's not true. Just sign off on the permit, do your job, and we'll shake hands at the end and call it quits. And we did. Well, a few months later, the assessor, the Weld County assessor himself, came by the house, knocked on the door, told me that there were some notes in the file with the building inspector. He just didn't think I was being truthful, and I was going to finish the basement without a permit. And he required me to let him into the house and inspect the basement. And I told him he wasn't coming in without a warrant. And that was that. I hadn't heard from him since. So it was a real challenge working with the building inspector.
Interesting.
With this project. Yeah. Okay. Why can't I turn the page here?
Obviously not train enthusiasts.
Yeah. So the mushroom is a multi-level layout. We have to transition between the levels some way. And on the fall revision, we use both helixes and a constant grade. This is an example of a two-track helix. This is during the construction phase, of course. This is all sealed in now. And half of it's visible on top and half of it's visible on the bottom to help reduce the amount of time that a train is trapped in the helix. There's a general rule for operating layouts. An operator doesn't want to see their train in a helix or the train hidden for probably any more than 10 or 15% of the total run. So I took that into consideration. And total run time, if you're operating here, you're not going to lose your train for any more than 10 or 15% in hidden track. So I'm very comfortable with the helix. It's constructed well. I've never had a problem with it. And my opinion is people shouldn't fear the helix if it's built right. So
what's your grade in the helix? And looks like you have about 6 turns, right? 7?
This is 5. So on the right here, bottom level, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Oh, okay.
And this is all detected in here. So on the right, this indicator, it's on the fascia on the right here is these things flash as your train either goes up or down the helix based on what track you're on. So the grade is about 1.7, it's about 1.7. So the ruling grade that's visible is 1.8. Everything in the helixes is about 1.6, is actually 1.67 to be
Okay.
specific. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think you said you mentioned it like 42-inch radius curve in the helix.
Yeah, these are probably 42. These might even be 44, 46, 40,
Yeah.
somewhere in there. Yeah.
So you're able to get a gentler grade.
That's right.
Turn. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, a little bit more on the mushroom construction. This is some early shots of the layout. It is L girder construction. So if you look at the photo on the right, you can see the L girder. I don't know if you guys can see the L girders or not. I'm going to get my, but there's L girders in there, and then you've got horizontal. I'm sorry?
At the front and the back here, right?
Yeah. So let me see if I can do this again. So the L girders are right here, for example, on the second level. And they're also underneath these cross members. These are 1x4 cross members. These are 1x2 cross members. These are L girders, and then they're supported by the floor at the floor joist level. And so, so it is an L girder construction, basically. The raised floor, and you can see the raised floor down here. These are 16 inches off the floor, off the concrete. Mm-hmm. So off the right here, mm-hmm. These are both 16-inch, and so this is the lower level off the concrete. And I don't know if you can make out this masking tape on the floor, but when I designed the layout in the CAD, I actually took the dimensions and laid it out with masking tape just to make sure it would fit, which it did. So this is the aisle between these masking tape lines on the first floor, and then the second level to reach up here are these raised floors. So and those, it's about 60 inches, so it's pretty good height. 60 inches off the raised floor.
Nice.
Okay. And before and after shot, this is the shot again to the left, and this is with the fascia and the valance and so forth put in on the right. It's the same shot. So,
well,
yeah. Oops, sorry about that. So anyway, you can't see the upper and the lower right-hand corner where it's finished. You can't see the upper level, and you can see the turn in the helix on the bottom here, which is just to the left on the other photo, lower left. That's all finished bench work, and then on the right, you can see the yard. So it's very difficult to conceptualize this as you're walking down the right-hand photo, the aisle, knowing what's on the other side. So
yes.
So anyway,
that's a great shot of that's a really descriptive shot on the left here of the construction method used, which right. has always just kind of having built for a long time, constructed houses and the like. It's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because your upper level almost floats in a way. I mean, I see it's supported on the backside, but it's suspended from the ceiling. It almost floats. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's unbelievably strong. I can actually get up onto this bench work, believe it or not, and it'll sustain my weight. And it does not look like it. When you look at that, and you say, "My God, those are 1x2s and some L girders," and but when you put the whole thing together, it's kind of like when you make a house out of toothpicks or something like that, and the integrity of the structure becomes greatly enhanced. That's what's happened with this bench work.
So how much clear space does that yield you in a particular shadow box, in a particular scene?
So this right here, for example, is probably 16 to 18 inches. On the right here, on the right is not mushroom. But on the left, I'm looking at the photo on the lower right.
Right.
Yeah, because so I've got about 18 inches, and then I've got about 6 inches maybe of additional space for wiring, lighting fixtures, things like that. That's kind of hidden above these diffuser panels, these light diffuser panels. So.
Very nice.
Okay, here's just this is the dimension of the basement itself. I'm trying to get the laser pointer up, but I can't. Anyway, that's just my fault. So this is basically, the house is basically a 65-foot by 65-foot square. And where it says main level, if you were to bring that square over and drop down, that's the garage. We have a large garage here.
Mhm.
It's almost 800 square feet. So there's some cutouts in the foundation. Like this is a small cutout in the lower part. I can't get my mouse to work, but anyway, it's a 65 by 65 foot square with a cutout for the garage, and the remaining unfinished basement portion where the layout is 3,000 square feet. That includes the crew lounge, the shop, and the utilities. So I'm not sure how well you can see the actual layout diagram or read it, but this is the main level, and staging is on the right, and it's in an area we call the traffic center. It's where the staging area is. Lots of staging tracks in there, but still not enough. And this is the upper level. And if you take a look at the peninsulas, those are all the mushrooms. Where the mushroom multi-level is, along the perimeter walls is a single level, except the lower left-hand corner, there's 2 levels along the wall. That's where we installed a branch line.
So did you design this track plan in CAD?
I used a Third Planet,
Yes.
which is kind of a model railroading CAD design program. So yeah.
Yep.
And the key was to identify the width of the aisles and the bench work, just to make sure that it fit within the footprint, and that's primarily what I used it for. So I think with most planning efforts, early on, it might be too premature to try to really define your track, because as you start to build, I can guarantee you that's going to change. Your track placement, how things are laid out, you start operating, you're going to make changes. So anyway, I get this comment a lot when we have open houses and visitors. How do I find the front door? It happens all the time. So
yeah, both Michelle and Gerald so far have said, yeah, that's me, and I have to join them.
Yeah,
That was me the first time I was there.
right.
There's got to be a block of cheese somewhere in here.
Yeah. So I had this cartoon mysteriously showed up on the layout. Somebody cut it out from somewhere and put it up on the fascia somewhere.
That's funny.
I think I know who it is, but it was good. It's worth it. Okay, so let's talk about operations for a few minutes. How are we doing on time here?
We're good. We're
good. So the real primary purpose was to have fun, prototypically simulating the operation, and we're modeling the railroad operations much like you model a freight car. You look at what the prototype does, what the prototype is, and we try to follow that as close as reasonably possible. We do it with probably 20 people every month. I like to hold a few slots for visitors, because every session I have people asking if they can come over and operate or observe, right? And so I always try to hold 1 or 2 positions for new operators, and I always team them up with somebody. I really like to do what I can to promote people into the operations aspect of the hobby, especially some of the younger folks. I give them every opportunity I can to get into the operating aspect of this.
That's great.
So,
that's great. Thank you.
So we try to use a lot of prototype practices, CTC. And by the way, when I talk about the young people, I've got a great story about I have a web page up with these great model trains and layout and everything. And on several occasions, I've gotten contacted by I'm positive they were the authorities. Right, asking what I was, trying to get into the operating session. I'm a young guy. I'm looking to play with model trains. Can I come over? And I'm sure that they were the authorities baiting me, because I had this, model railroad webpage, and I encourage people to come over and operate. But anyway, so we do try to emulate the prototype using CTC, car handling, proper, paperwork. We do use special instructions, Form A's and B's, things like that. I try to have a wide variety of jobs, because a lot of operators have different interests. Some love to run a yard, some love to dispatch, some just want to run over the road from point A to point B on a main line. So I really have a good blend of positions to keep people happy and to fill a lot of needs, I think. So we do select based on seniority, just like the real railroad, right?
Yep.
Seniority counts. So people that have helped with the construction, helped during open houses, that come to operate every month, everybody earns seniority points, and I track that. And when we select jobs, I have a software application that tracks all that, assigns the seniority points, and there's a little bit of randomness built in there. And that's how we select jobs. So all trains are operated between crew change points, visible points on the layout so that you don't have to run trains in and out of staging. And we actually have 2 people that work in staging that just build trains, take them in and out to the crew change points. And just like on a real prototype, you get on your train at one point, you review your paperwork, your manifest, all that stuff. You contact the dispatcher when you're ready to go, and you depart. And same when you arrive at a crew change point. And you get off your train, and you return your paperwork to the clerk, and that's it. That's all the operator sees, which is very helpful. And I don't know. I didn't want to bring this up. What do operating sessions look like during this COVID-19 period? I have no idea. I've gotten some feedback from some people in the area and some layout owners I know that are willing to do it right now, believe it or not. And some that are saying we won't be operating at all in the rest of this entire year. So it really depends on how the host feels, the owner, and how individual operators feel. So again, I've heard various opinions about this. I don't know where it's going to go or what's going to happen. To be frank, an operating session is a really bad environment. I mean, people are very close to each other. They're touching the same things. Sometimes there's very poor circulation, air circulation in the basements. And it's just not a very good environment for social distancing.
You know, I was trying to remember on one of our episodes, maybe 2 ago, and maybe Chris or Michelle or someone else can remember who said this, but someone who has a Conrail layout just did a virtual operating session.
Yeah, that was the Ognata cutoff or something like that.
The Onondaga cutoff.
Yeah, and he had a remote dispatcher and crews that were using their phones, I think, to operate and run the trains. And we could do that here, but really what works well is the social interaction, I think, between everybody when we operate. And people, we've tried to do remote dispatching. We could do it, but there are people that are fighting it out and, for example, to dispatch here on site with this machine, in the dispatcher's office here. So, I don't know. It's certainly a possibility, and maybe we'll get to that point if we're just, really want to operate that bad, I guess, and we're not able to yet. I don't know.
Right.
And we're just going to play it by ear.
As you say, it's people first. It's mostly about the social interaction.
Right.
And that makes it it's not quite as fun if you're a single person crew than if you're working with another crew member, maybe somebody you haven't worked with before. That's part of the whole thing,
Exactly. Okay, so real quick, the positions. We have a dispatcher, a traffic manager, an assistant that work in the traffic center. They manage the crews, they call the crews, they generate the manifest, the switch lists, they assemble the trains, and they put them out on the layout to the crew change points. There's 4 jobs in the yard. Yard master does not turn a wheel. There's too much delegation, answering the phone, coordinating with the dispatcher and the traffic manager. We have a job that works east classification, west classification in the intermodal facility, and a hustler. We have a branch line that's dedicated crew for the entire session. They're just off the main line doing their own thing. Again, some people don't want to be on the main, so there's an opportunity for them. We have a public service coal shuttle that just goes back and forth between the coal mine and the public service power plant. There's a small yard in Kimber that does classification work, industry switching, works with through freights that drop off and pick up. There's a Kimber turn, which is starts in the yard. We call it the crawler because it takes the entire session to run that train because you're dodging mainline traffic. Same with the Decker's turn, which goes eastbound out of the yard. The Kimber turn goes westbound. We do occasionally have a Union Station job and an extra when we run a lot of Amtrak and we're mixing Amtrak equipment and so forth. And we have 6 or 8 jobs on the extra board, and this could be a through freights, industry switching, what have you. So those are the primary jobs. This is an eye chart, but this is the dispatchers panel. I'm not sure how well you guys can see this, but This is just a schematic of the layout. The dispatcher sees this. You can throw the switches, set the routes and the signals. The train's track. So there's a train. Let's see if I can show it to you guys here. There's a train symbol right up here, and those symbols move as the train progresses along the route.
Nice.
So the dispatcher knows where the trains are. There's some hot box detectors and high wide detectors, 2 hot boxes up here. And when those things go off, these flash. So the dispatcher knows there's a problem. So we have a hot box. This is the mountain district up here. And we have high wides and hot boxes. These things flash like crazy when, there's a problem. The same with the hot box over here. And so again, these are the crew change points, the yards, the ends. The UP comes on up here, and the UP gets off and on over here. So that's kind of what the dispatcher's panel looks like.
Awesome.
Dispatcher also has a snapshot of all the trains, the lineup, the length and the weight, departure times and so forth, so that if he wants to make a meet, he knows what the length of the trains are, and he can see on his panel if they're going to fit. So it's important that dispatcher knows what the length of the trains are and the tonnage, because certain trains do need helpers going up the grade. And then it's up to the crew, and it often denotes that on the manifest that if you're over a certain tonnage and you have certain horsepower, you've got to call for a manned helper, even though we do use some DPUs. So dispatcher has some visibility to that. So there's 2 screens that the dispatcher sees. So this is a special, we have a number of special jobs. This is a rotary plow. It's a 2-person job. When it snows outside during a session, we run the plow train. We have one operator that just runs the rotary. This thing actually turns and has sound and lights, and the chute has to move. So that's their responsibility. And then we have the engineer that runs the 3 SD40-2s behind it. We have a fire train. When there's high fire danger in Colorado, like there was a red flag a couple days ago, but we would run this train. And he goes, leaves Kimber, goes up the grade into the mountain area, and he patrols and extinguishes fire. These are tank cars, just like the BNSF used to use. They don't use these much anymore, but they have sprayers on them and you can't see them. And this maintenance away fire caboose has got deluge guns on both ends connected to the fire cars. So we do run the fire train when there's a high fire danger. We do run some MOW and shutdown track. This, for example, is a time when we had a mainline section of the double track main shut down. So we've got the Form Bs, all that good stuff out there. And we do that occasionally. We take a track out of service during a part of a session. One of the jobs is to go clean it up, right? Take the work train back out, get all the stuff cleaned up and clear up the main line. So we do that occasionally. During the holidays, we run a Christmas train, employee special. They stop at all the, certain areas and distribute gifts, and you get to meet the chairman and all that good stuff. We do have a number of Fall River Division followers and visitors that have provided some equipment. This is Lenny Harlow's road, and he sent a car in. Again, great opportunity to freelance, right? Put the stuff on your layout.
Right.
Eric Broman, I've always been a fan of his layout, so he gifted me with one of his cars that ran on his railroad for quite a while. Greg McComas is Central Interstate. Greg's been here and works for the BNSF and has been helpful with the prototype operations. He's got a great layout. He's down in Fort Worth. He's got a car in the layout. This is a friend, Sammy Carlisle in Tulsa. He's got a great Santa Fe layout, and he provided this. And there's only 3 of us in the country that have these Bikini Magic trailers, so it's been an honor to have that. Yeah. This was a group that came out from St. Louis and operated, brought a car. So
we pick up.
Yeah, this is Chuck Shell's layout. Chuck gave me a couple of cars from his Potter River and Chugwater. Chuck passed away a few years ago. So
what a chili.
Yeah, he had a fantastic layout. Richard Cam's layout, Sioux Line and Shreveport, he brought a car up. So there are a lot of freight cars that have been gifted that I like to see on the layout. So we rotate them in and out. And operating sessions like hosting a dinner party, I really feel like that. There are guests coming into my home. I try to make it as comfortable as possible. There's always a lot of food and drink and social activity. I'm a firm believer in keeping the layout in the area neat and organized because operators, I think, respect the layout and the equipment. They treat it well when things are organized and cleaned up well. It helps keep operations at a slow pace when there's finished and neat, organized areas. We just don't want it too comfortable. This is Paul Sullivan in the left, and believe it or not, his eyes are closed. And I took the shot I was in Utah at this is John Robinson, and this must have been Utah, Colorado Western. Can't think of his name right now, but I go over there every few years and operate with Lee Nichols. So we do have a lot of people. This is Scott Chatfield. It's really all about the people. If anybody from Denver knows the name Chatfield, that's Scott Chatfield. He's a direct relation to the Chatfield name and areas in Denver. These are two guys. These are both yard masters, obviously taking their jobs a little bit differently. So it stresses some people out, and some people age pretty loose with the yard master job. We have some husband and wife teams, Doug and Barbara Geiger, and then Kate and Bill Botkin. A couple of students from CU. CU has their own program called Rail Buffs, and they actually are model railroaders and prototype rail fans. And the school has sponsored their group, so they come over and operate on occasion.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. This is a father-son team from Germany. They come over. They've been over a few times. I have a lot of people that travel out here. There's a guy from Atlanta that comes out tries to get out on a regular basis, Utah. So there are quite a few people that travel out here to operate. Dispatching, again, the job's always in high demand. I just love to run the computer, I think, and be in charge. I don't know. And again, we've got a wayfind, right? It's a maze in here. And again, another layout or cartoon that somebody provided, and I can't remember who left this behind, but somebody did. So let's look real quick at the Kimber crawler, and we'll just go through this real quick and then try to get on the layout. But it's a westbound local that switches interchanges and industries. It's selected. This takes the entire session. Departs at 6 a.m. from the yard. Switches trailing points in each direction. It leaves Fall River Yard, goes to Kimber, and turns. It can be a 1, 2, or 3 person crew. So depending on how many operators we have and what they want to do, sometimes we run a 3-person crew with a engineer, conductor, and a brakeman. And this is a real role-playing experience. So if we run a 3-person crew on this job, there's a set of instructions, and it's as detailed as not being able to talk to each other unless your figures are really close. To each person is given a figure, and you have to simulate walking time and all that stuff. And it really is a lot of fun. But that information is all on my webpage about that 3-person crew.
That's so cool.
It's blocked and prepared by the previous shift, so it's ready to go at 6 a.m. Typically, we see 2 SD40-2s on there, between 12 and 18 cars and a shoving platform. There's a lot of reverse moves and runarounds, so shoving platform helps. And they have to get a switch key, radio, and all that kind of good stuff. So this is a typical manifest. Got some instructions about the Kimber crawler, what you do, and some hints. I try to tell people not how to do it, but what to do, and they can figure out how to do it themselves. It's part of the fun. So we leave with 9 loads and 5 empties. Our first work is at Sage. We have a pickup, a pole on the spot, and as we go along the route, this particular manifest is 2 pages long, a lot of work, and a lot of dodging the mainline traffic. So that's it. If we want, we can go look at the layout, the Kimber crawler.
Sure.
If we have time.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Okay, let's do that real quick. I'm going to go to my other phone. Hopefully it's still showing.
All righty.
I'm going to stop share. Okay.
Hey, Kevin, this might be a good time to tell everybody that we do plan to have John back for a very detailed layout tour.
That's right.
In the future,
Yeah.
probably in about 2 weeks or so.
We were talking about the fact that just to do a fast tour of the entire layout is about 45 minutes and would be the whole show basically. And of course our focus is on John. and how he got to this point with, like I say, 3,000 square feet full of railroad. So yeah, in our next installment, not next proximate, but next installment of John and the Fall River Division, we will have we'll just do an end-to-end tour.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, got you, John.
Okay, so I'm looking at a really small picture here. Let me see if I can change it so I can view it better, but no, I can't. Anyway, so this is the power on the Kimber Crawler. This is the yard. This is the division yard, Fall River Division Yard. And we have a subdivision that goes west, and we have two subdivisions that go east. The Kimber Crawler is the westbound local. He works the west subdivision, turns at Kimber, and comes back. So what we've got here is proto throttle. This is typically what a 2 or 3 person crew uses, and because this is hard to handle with a radio and a manifest and switch keys and all that good stuff, we'd like to use this with a 2 or 3 person job because it takes both hands.
Mm-hmm.
So they get that. They pick up their switch key right here for the switches on the main line. This is a consist card. Oops, I just shorted layout. There we go. This is a consist card so that the crews know what to put into Digitrax. This is consist number 34. It's got the engines. So you can see their function keys. It's got their horsepower on it and total length of the power, so they can add that to the length of their manifest. And they know what the overall length of their train is, so they can let the dispatcher know if they get asked. So this is the train right here. A couple of 40-2s today, and I think there's probably 14 or 16 cars. It's kind of hard. It's on one of the 4 arrival departure tracks. It's kind of hard to see, but it goes on and on way back there. So there's 14 cars. So when the crew has had their safety briefing, they talk about what they're going to do. They've reviewed the manifest. They've checked their cars. They need to let the dispatcher know. They'll call the dispatcher on the radio and say, this is the Kimber Crawler. We're ready to depart westbound. And the person working this end of the yard will set the switches on the departure track. And dispatcher will give them a signal. And it looks like right now they've got a approach. And they'll head out of the yard. And they'll go westbound. So just they'll follow the main line out of the yard, and they'll go to Sage, which is their first area to work. And I don't have the lights on over there, so we're not going to go over. But so that is the Kimber Crawler.
Nice.
And they'll spend the entire session, the entire operating session, out on the railroad. Typically, 75-80% of the time, they get back to the yard during the shift. The other time, they go dead on the law out there on the road. Yeah. So this is the Fall River Yard. And there's the shoving platform. Yeah, that's the shoving platform today.
Yep.
So that's a rail train in the back.
Yeah,
on the
I was going to say, we've got a nice rail train back there, too.
Yeah. That was from the previous session. They went dead on the law here in the yard. So the next session, we'll pick it up. And crew will pull that out, and it goes over to Tacoma. So there's probably 4 or 5 trains out on the layout that'll be dog catched for the next session. So I know we're almost out of time, Kevin. You want to go back and do Q&A, or do you want to?
Yeah, we can. Let's do that. Michelle, what questions do we have?
Let me shut this down, and I'll go back to my office.
You go right ahead, and when you get back there, she'll have a question for you, I'm sure.
Well, honestly, everybody I think is so amazed. They don't have questions. We're just so engrossed in listening to all the things he's saying. I have a personal question. I've been there twice. Both times were kind of time constrained, and I have yet to find the entrance to that staging yard. I think it's hidden.
It might be. Maybe it's a trap door.
I don't know if John heard that question.
Did you?
Okay, I'm sorry, Michelle. Go ahead. I missed you.
The question was, I've been to your layout twice. Both times I didn't have a whole lot of time to stay.
Okay.
I never found the entrance to your staging yard. I think it's hidden. Is it hidden or something?
It's not hidden. It's It's just on the other side of the layout. But
I never found it.
okay, it's the entrance into staging is a duck under, and it was designed like that because I want the operators to stay in there during a session. And during a session, I don't want people going in there. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a duck under, yeah. And
that reality piece for you. I love how you connect real weather to your layout too.
Yeah.
And now we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
The question is, how do you make your geometry train?
Geometry train?
Yeah, I don't understand the question. Maybe you can clarify that. I thought maybe it was something I didn't understand. And another question is, I'll let you answer this one and while we figure that one out. In a typical op session, about how much percentage-wise runs trouble-free for you?
Almost all of it. Very seldom do we ever have any problems. And I think that's just because, I've had some very problematic layouts and I've learned the hard way. And I think that experience has really helped with this layout. So, and another thing that's been helpful is I've over-planned. So, for example, if I do my math right and I need only 8 boosters and I max out the capacity I only maxed out to 70 or 80% so that I have some room, right? So I might install 10 boosters instead of 8 that I need at only 70% capacity, and that's my concept with everything that I do. So, for example, maximum bus length. You should keep your bus length. No more than really 25 feet, 30 feet before you start getting noise and issues on the bus and having problems. So if everybody tells me I should be 25 or 30 feet on a maximum length on a bus, I'm going to go 20, right? Just to be safe. And so that's been my whole concept, and it's really helped with reliability for everything I've done.
And so then my question on that is, did you build enough staging?
I think so. I'm pretty happy with it, believe it or not. But
I hear people say that all the time. I wish
yeah.
I built more staging. I wish I built more staging.
Yeah, I think we can go through the staging area during the layout tour, but okay. I think there's just never enough staging. I think that's true, always true.
So here's a question regarding staging. Do you have to do much or any staging between your sessions, or is your traffic plan set up for continuous car forwarding?
It's continuous car forwarding. I don't restage. There might be, I think there's 2 trains that I have to turn in staging. I just have to move the engine to the other end, and those are the intermodals. But basically everything is set because conceptually, the whole layout's a big loop. So it goes back into staging by design and is facing the right direction. So it goes out the next session without having to, make any changes. So I do check for accuracy, make sure cars were spotted properly between sessions, but I really don't have to set up like most layout owners do.
That's where good planning really pays off.
It is, yeah. That's why I did it that way. I mean, I don't want to spend an hour or 2 restaging for a session.
Right.
So,
I have an earlier question, Michelle, was how long is a typical operating session, John?
4 hours. So we typically have a 4-hour session and then an optional dinner after the session at a local restaurant.
Nice. Someone's wanting to know if you're happy with your lighting and would you do it differently if you could? Well,
I would certainly go with LED lighting. When I started the layout, LEDs were just so expensive. However, the T8 fluorescents, they're quick start, they're quiet. I like the color tone with the daylight bulbs. I'm very happy with the fluorescents. So I would go with LEDs though if I had to do it over. Yeah.
I like how you have the diffusers. A lot of layouts don't do that. They just tuck the lights under but don't have the diffusers. I think that's really nice touch.
Yeah, and that's something I had with the previous layout. I just really love that shadow box effect, and the lighting diffusers help. When you look up, without seeing all the wires, electrical lighting, light shining in your eyes. So the diffusers really do help.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so we have a clarification on that question. Do you have a track geometry train?
I have a car. I have a car. It's not really a train, but it's a car. It was custom built by a friend in Germany. Yeah.
Very cool. Is that part of your work?
Totally scratch built. I'm sorry?
Is that part of like your work when your track work goes out? Do you take it out then, or?
We do it. We've run that occasionally. Yeah.
Very cool.
We did have another one up there, Michelle. Let's see. It was any advice for someone who wants to design a mushroom layout? Not a whole lot out there.
Yeah, Reed. There are some references. Model Railroader had done some. Joe Fugate had done a number of articles in 1997. There's also Joe Fugate also has a couple of videos out there. I've got all those, and if they want to send me an email, my email contact is on my webpage. You can drop me an email. I'll send you the references. But yeah, there's not a lot of mushroom layouts out there. I just think that people think they're too complex, and I understand that. I mean, it's complicated. It appears complicated. It's hard to communicate that. Even when I started with the work crew early on, trying to help them understand the concept and my visual idea of how to do the mushroom was difficult, even after watching videos, looking at the CAD, looking at articles and layout plans of other mushroom layouts, until you start to work with it and see it and build it and understand the whole concept. It's hard to understand, and it's probably intimidating to a lot of people. I understand that. So do as much research as you can, and I'm certainly willing to help with that if anybody wants to email me.
And along those lines, to your comments, John, about Acola has added that the layout design SIG is worthwhile to check out if you're looking to build any layout of any size or type. There's a lot of ingenious people out there that are willing to help, which is what it's all about. You know.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a great group. And they're at the NMRA, and they're at a lot of other events. They'll do some layout design critique for you and help you with layout planning. It's a great resource.
I guess we have one final question there, Michelle, right?
Yeah, and I have a Facebook question. There's two here now. Okay, so I'll do the Facebook question. It's about staging, being a staging operator. Do they actively assemble trains in staging, or do they just kind of change loads to bring change trains to the crew change points?
They actually build them. So what happens is the traffic manager generates a manifest. And if there's 25 cars on that train, the assistant traffic manager actually takes cars, puts them on a build track, builds them. If there's a visible load, they put the load in there. That's important. And then they put the power on, and then they send it out to the crew change point.
Okay.
So it's all done in real time. So sometimes a car might move twice in a session. It might go into staging early and come out later. Most of the time that doesn't happen, but it's a possibility.
Okay. We have a question on how you keep up your track cleaning and layout maintenance.
We do clean track before the session. It takes maybe a half hour. I use mineral spirits on the railhead, and that seems to work really well. The room itself, I have a drop ceiling. There's no concrete floor, and I think that helps with controlling the amount of dust and particles. To be honest, most of the time when the track gets dirty from people are in the layout room, and I know there's been a lot of analysis done on what is track gunk, and a lot of it has to do with people, and as well as using the mineral spirits keeps the arcing down and helps reduce a lot of the crud too. So.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, it's not bad at all. A half hour before the session, 2 or 3 of us might clean track.
Yeah, you don't have like a door to the outside to your layout, which is really nice. It's very controlled. The last question here is, when are you going to have Fall River Division t-shirts for sale?
Boy.
You probably know who's asking the question.
I get that question a lot. Right now we do have shirts, but people have to earn them. You show up and help at an open house, or you're.
Well, that's nice. That's a really good system. So you kind of.
The problem is I can get in trouble by selling t-shirts. I wouldn't, because there's a logo, the BNSF logo, and I've been challenged by both the railroad and I have an industry on the layout called Maxim Petroleum, and they've come after me, believe it or not, because I've used their logo on the layout, and I read them the riot act, and we had a big to-do about that. But I'm not doing anything for profit, so I'm not infringing, and I've gone through all that, but.
Wow.
So they probably
you have fans. I guess that's the point, is that you have fans.
Right. So at some point I will make some t-shirts and sell them, but not for profit. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, that's all the questions we have. Oh, wait, no. There's one more that just popped up if we have time. How do you keep your operators from touching the rails and creating false detections?
They don't touch them. There's no reason for them to touch the rails. So, I mean, generally we don't have problems with derailments, and there's no really need to reach in. They do have to reach in to throw a turnout or a switch on non-mainline track. But it's usually not a problem. I don't think I've ever had a problem with somebody touching the rails and creating a detection.
It seems like that 480 carrier voltage helps with that too.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They touch it once.
That's right. Great deterrent. Yeah.
Well, John, this has been delightful, and we'll be able to come back for a tour of the layout. We're talking about a second installment, right? And we'll do an end-to-end tour just of the layout. So
sure, we can do that. Yeah, no problem.
That sounds awesome. We'll look forward to that. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Thanks for everybody that's been on this call. It was our biggest crowd yet. And let's see, what do we have coming up? Oh yeah, next Tuesday, our guest is going to be Ken Karlowitz, who's a noted rail photographer and model railroader with his Delaware and Hudson. It was a cover story of Model Railroad Planning 2019. So if you want to go take a look at that issue, you'll see his work of art. And Ken is an artist, and so you'll see that very much. Or you might want to look on the Caboose Facebook page. I just posted a documentary about Ken called Sense of Place. So I think you'll enjoy that. And that's kind of a preview of what's coming up Tuesday the 5th, which is this next Tuesday. And of course, the regular OS happy hour this Saturday from 5 to 6 Mountain Time. So we hope to see you at one or preferably both of those. Again, John, thanks. Thanks to my co-hosts, Chris and Michelle, and thanks to all who've been on this call. And we'll see you hopefully Saturday and Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.